Hello, 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 and welcome to this week's episode of Tracy's Tuesday Talks. I am your hostess, Tracy Latono with Golden Horse Financial Coaching, where I help people gain confidence, control, and clarity with their finances through transformation in mindsets, habits, and behaviors with their money. I have an especially special guest, Steve Kidd, who helps people tell their stories and get their stories published. And I am super excited to have him here. So, Steve, introduce yourself and share with us what you do.
Hi, my name's Steve Kidd. I am a third generation minister, an international best-selling author of now, we'll plug it, my 20th book. It's called Bestseller is Only the Beginning. I've literally worked with thousands of people in the process of writing, publishing, and marketing their book to bestseller and beyond, because there's so much that goes beyond your bestseller. But the really cool part about that is the literally millions of people that the books that those people have written have affected, the lives that have been changed. And I'm really honored to be part of that process. And I'm excited to be here with you today, Tracy.
Awesome. So, you just said something that really kind of tickled my coaching ear is what you get to do is help other people share their stories to change lives. So, ultimately, what you get to do is through helping people share their stories, you get to help them change the lives of thousands of people.
Oh
So
yeah, it's like being a little tiny grain in changing the world. It's really kind of cool.
that is awesome. So what brought you into this? How did you get to where you are now?
So ultimately, I'm a marketing company with a strong publishing division. I actually started selling. This is a fun story. When I was 5 years old, my parents had bought holiday cards and napkins for my brothers to sell. And very quickly, my brothers discovered that they didn't really like selling. Now, because I'm living now remodeling a house with my older brother, I've learned more of this story than the way I usually tell it. And I found out that not only did they quickly discover that mowing lawns and things like that, they were much more well suited for and enjoyed better, but also I annoyed the heck out of them because I would go to houses that they had already gone to, and they would tell me, don't go there. They already said no. And I would go into the house and come out with a sale.
I mean, you were this 5-year-old kid. Who could say no to a 5-year-old
Right.
kid with an
Yeah.
entrepreneurial spirit? That's
Five,
awesome.
the best sales closing technique in the world is to be cute and five. So when we grow up, we have to learn some more skills. But so, I've literally been in sales and marketing my whole life. I officially started a marketing company as an adult in 1988. And that was right after I had spent a year actually working as the sales manager for a sales company. And then went out on my own and had my own company and have been in that space ever since. And then we were early adopters. I love technology and the internet. And we were actually in it, like I like to say, before we even had the word the internet, back in the days of bulletin boards and stuff like that. And then in 2007, my then wife and one of my younger daughters, they were big fans of the movie Twilight, if you remember that movie.
It looks
we
remember.
lived we lived right near where all of the original movie was filmed and stuff, and they took a mother-daughter trip around all the filming locations. Prior to then, there was a lot of information, but you both had to dig it out, as well as a lot of people were kind of quiet. They were really secretive about they had known where and had even potentially gone. It's really an interesting side story. When they were originally filming that movie, and it was totally an indie movie, and they didn't expect it to be that big, but there was a huge following of what was called the Twilight Moms, and they would share with one another where that day's filming was going to be, and they would all descend on the filming.
Oh my
And it's just like
god.
hordes. But finding where each one of those locations was not public knowledge. And so they did a bunch of research and stuff and found it, and then took a mother-daughter trip and visited all of those and took pictures and blogged about what they were doing and stuff. And then all those posts and stuff actually grew into a book And I helped them publish that book, and it was actually for a while there, it was the number one best-selling movie-related travel guide on Amazon, um, in self-publishing world. From there, we really learned the power of a best-selling book, and so we were exclusively still just using best-selling books for our high-end, I'm talking like multi-million dollar clients, one at a time, spend the whole year, maybe even a couple of years working with just one client. We needed them to be a bestseller in order to market them to their ultimate maximum potential. And so we were doing that for them. We'd just literally take a signature talk that somebody had done on stage and turn that talk into a book. They'd show up to their website and be like, hey, when did I publish a book? Let alone when did it become a bestseller? So we had that all in spades. And then a coach actually encouraged us, hey, you should make that a program that everybody can be a part of. So we created what is called the Authority Package, which is our program that we have now, and began to share it with everybody in the world and make it accessible for people who aren't multimillionaires to be able to do that whole process of writing, publishing, and marketing their books to bestseller. And then of course, you have the sideline of the fact that I love reading, I love writing, I love telling stories, as you can tell. So I've also been writing books myself.
Wow. Wow. So you said that you could create a book just from a talk that somebody did.
Oh, yes. Yeah, the fastest we've ever done a book from just a recorded talk that somebody sent us. We actually did a book all the way to its release in 3 days.
Oh my gosh. Because,
Yeah.
like, before I met you, Steve, like, I was under the impression, like, writers, authors were the people who just were holed up in their bedrooms or in secluded cabins in the middle of the woods, and they spent the entire year, like, on the typewriter, and then when they hit writer's block, it was like, "Oh my gosh," it was just this huge thing. So, how do you create books from what people say?
I always encourage people. That's why a signature talk works so well, or at least as a starting point. I always encourage you to do your book via interview, do it speaking to write versus writing. Um, there's one major reason for that, and that's that when we write, it tends to be very cathartic, very internalized. It's what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What emotions am I having right now? When we talk, like you and I are having a conversation right now, um, I want to answer the questions you're giving me. I'm thinking about making this so that you understand what I'm saying. When we're writing, the only person that has to understand what we mean when we're writing is us. And so if we skip a word, we think that that word's there because we already knew that story anyway. If we talk about, that time with Aunt Jan, we can start immediately laughing about that time with Aunt Jan without going into the details of the story. Everybody else will look at us if we're funny, if we're doing that in a conversation. And so when we speak, it's for the listener. And so therefore, when we speak to write, it becomes for the reader versus just essentially a therapy session for us.
Wow. So what I'm hearing you say is how you help people create their book or help pull that story out of them is just through conversation. They don't have to write a word themselves.
Yeah, in fact, I encourage them don't come to the call. My favorite calls are the ones when the person says, I'm not ready at all. Let's reschedule. And I'm like, let's just try it. And it's cool because yeah, we just have a conversation. Almost always the person says, does this make any sense? And then that's taken and transcribed and we put it together and make it flow. And all of a sudden I loved it. One of my authors, it's actually been a testimonial on my page. She said, I finally, for the first time, see my words. People have been telling me to write for years, and I've never known what to write, what to say, or how my voice really was. She goes, and now I see it in writing and I understand. Um, yeah.
That is so powerful because, Steve, like you and I know that every single human on this planet has a story to tell. Every single human on this planet That includes you, person who is watching this. You've got a story to tell. And stories are the things that impact us for not only the present, but also for the future. Stories were the things that started off history, like
Mhm.
that oral history of before the written language. People were telling stories of their
Mhm.
ancestors to pass down through the generations. So how did what are your viewpoints on that, Steve, with everyone having a story?
Everybody has a purpose. Let's start there. There is nobody, as I like to say, there's nobody that was created just to keep the carbon dioxide to oxygen balance on the planet proper. We all have a purpose. And right here, right now, wherever we are now, we were different yesterday. We will be different tomorrow. But with the things we're going through, with the challenges, the victories, the struggles, all of those things in life that we have, there is somebody that's a step behind us. There is somebody that, we found a stepping stone across the swamp of, because sometimes you're just going through the muck and the mire of life. But we found something, even if it's just today that we got through, there's somebody behind us that doesn't know there's the stone there, doesn't know that it's more solid ground there, and they're drowning and they need that help. And so my 8 year well, my granddaughter, she's 13 now, but when she was 8, she wrote a book, and we made it a bestseller. And the only thing she knew then was that her best friend's name, and they were besties, and she had to tell the world about meeting her best friend, you know. And at 8, that's what she had to share with the world. And she's come a long ways, and it'd be interesting to see what book she writes now. But um that's the same in life, and we just need to keep sharing that as we go on. You mentioned, if you don't mind my going on a little bit here, you mentioned historical storytellers. I actually met a lady who, ironically, she was a Quileute from the actual tribe that's mentioned in the Twilight movies. We won't get back into Twilight, but she was the generational. She had been taught her whole life by her grandfather the stories of their particular. They're called houses. So the entire nation is broken up into houses. Extended families lived in big long houses. And again, we won't get into the whole of everything, but she had spent literally from before she could write, when she began to have enough comprehension, being told over and over and over again the generational stories from her grandfather, and having him work with her so that when she told the story, she was repeating it, without embellishments that were not true to it, because that was their history.
Mm.
They were an old enough culture that the bulk of their history was from before they had a written language. And even though their particular tribe had gotten to the point where much of their actual original spoken language had been lost through the years, um, a lot of that having to do with the fact that that particular culture, they had a language for how men speak to men, would be one word, how a man would speak to a woman, same word, but in their language, it was a different word.
Mhm.
How you spoke to somebody that wasn't part of your family would be a third different word.
Wow.
And then how you speak to a child would be a fourth different word. I mean, it was very, very, and so over the course of time, mostly all that's been saved is how they spoke to outsiders, is the only words that they remember. But those cultural traditions he taught her, and now she could just, we spent one night just like 4 or 5 hours at least, and she just told her story after story after story. It was so fun to just listen to her. I could have sat there. I mean, if it hadn't been that it was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, we finally went to bed. We could have just listened to her forever. It was really cool. And that's what your stories are. They're just something that the next group of people needs to hear.
Yeah. You nailed something on the head for me. People need to hear our stories because what we've been through is one step ahead of where somebody else might be. And like I see this in the financial world a lot. Like you have a coach or somebody who reaches back to help somebody who's in the same muck that you're in. Well, if that coach is 2 to 3 steps ahead, like, that coach is more relatable than somebody who might be 100 steps ahead, that might be so far removed from the situation that they might not exactly remember what everything felt like to be there. So that is so important, like, even if you are in the midst of hardships and trials, like, I encourage you, the listener, to have a conversation with Steve just to get your story out there. Um, So, how do you help people become Amazon bestsellers?
Well, and this is the hard part of the conversation always because it's kind of like getting to be the person who tells a kid that there is no Santa Claus. Um, because it's not magic, it is a system. Amazon is definitely a system. And the truth of the matter is Amazon is just a search engine. At its core, the base algorithm of Amazon is written from the same basic scripting language as what Google is. The difference being is that Google, you're searching for information. Amazon, you're searching for a product to buy. But
Mhm,
the same basic concept, especially when Google came out, their big claim to fame was the concept of relevance, meaning that when you search for puppies, you don't get, and I hate to say it this way, but it's the truth, you don't get 25,000 sites on something to do with sex before you can get to puppies. And prior to Google, that was how search, that was the fallacy of what happened in search engines and that relevance that, if I search for puppies, I want to find something about puppies, was the heart and soul and core of that core. And so when you're going to buy, now you can't buy a puppy that I know of from Amazon, but if you're going to buy a puppy from Amazon, you would want to, a stuffed animal would probably come up, you'd want something relevant to that. The same thing's true. And so much of what I do is actually search engine optimization so that the algorithm understands that. And then there's a whole bunch of nuances. I'll give you a little one. This is free information for everybody listening. Um, Amazon is the only statistically driven bestseller list. All the rest of them, they take purchases actually. So like Walmart buys 50,000 copies of Tony Robbins' latest book. And the Nielsen Company, the same one that does, rankings for television, does that list. And they say this book had the most purchases, and they have a top 100 list. And then they also have an expanded list in all the categories. And that's what, say, for example, New York Times uses is that list. But all of those New York Times, Entrepreneur Magazine, whatever, all of those are then editorialized, number one for their reader, and number two from some decisions that company's made. For example, New York Times bestseller, they only really rank people whose books have been major purchases from big box retailers.
mhm,
So if, for example, they actually had a girl that was listed as number one bestseller that they took it back away from her because all of her sales were done in person at, her book was a sci-fi book and she did them at like Comic Cons and things like that. She was by far the best selling author in that category, but there were very, very few sales in big box retailers and for their reasons. Amazon's is just purely, if your book's at number two and another book's at number three, the book at number two sold during that hour more books than the book at number three. Now, there's other nuances to the algorithm,
mhm,
but the way to make that make sense for you is take a number, a tiny number like 10. 10 sales in an hour is algorithmically, statistically, more than 200 sales in a day, which is more than 6,000 sales in a month, which is more than 72,000 sales in a year. meaning that a book could sell 72,000 copies in a year, but not have had an hour where they sold 10. So when you sell 10 in an hour, Amazon's algorithm, along with a whole bunch of other things, but that's one of the things that triggers it and says, hey, this is a book we need to take notice of.
Yeah.
And so that's, without getting into all the technical details, that's kind of the heart and soul of part of what we do is we just optimize your book so that Amazon sees it and wants to tell other people how great it is.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, what lights your fire about the work that you do?
Well, like I said, I really get excited being in the space of the reader. I like knowing that it's going to help somebody. I like the thought of the fact that somebody who is desperately in need of an answer. We've all been through that time where something horrible has happened in our life. And sometimes I know I've done it. You've probably done it too. Might even be the middle of the night, and we may even be crying. We're in front of Google searching for an answer. Why do I feel this way? What's the way out of this? What? And, we're just desperate in that moment. And when we can create a book that answers that question for a person, and that person, if nothing else, can just not feel alone. Hey, I'm not the only person. Because as human nature, we tend to, as soon as something happens to us, we hibernate. We go into self-preservation,
Mhm.
and it's not uncommon, say for example, if you got diagnosed with cancer, hope it never happens. Um, it's not uncommon to feel like you're the only person in the world that's going through what you've gone through, even though, and you can go to cancer wards and talk to the individuals there. And as you go room to room, bed to bed, you can hear each one of those people say that same thing about how nobody understands what I'm going through, even though they're sitting in the bed or in the room next to somebody that has exactly the same thing as they do.
Mhm.
And so when we can then share with people, you're not alone. And here's what I did. Um, when our youngest daughter was in the hospital for 6 months when she had AML. Good news is she's fine. She's good. She's married. Um, in fact, she just passed the 5-year mark, which is quote unquote cured. So really, really good. I always get to the end of that story first. But there were days when it just felt impossible. I mean, she was in complete organ failure by the time they got her into the hospital, and we pretty well lost her. I mean, we're fortunate because she made it through, but there were days when it just seemed impossible. But to have moms and dads who were even just blogging and talking about their experience 3 months ahead of what we were, 6 months ahead, a year, 2 years, that was life. That was breath. That was like being in the desert and having somebody offer you a thimble full of water. And, and even still, it makes me emotional. But for each person, doesn't have to be cancer. It could be, I don't know, something silly that feels like stubbing your toe. But for them, it's that extreme. And when you share what you know so far, it makes a difference in somebody's life.
Yeah. Steve, thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
It truly shows how much you care about what you do. So, and this could just be a question that has no answer, but of course everybody has a story, but have you noticed a trend of what kind of stories people are looking for?
Well, yes and no. Because I'd be hard pressed to think of a genre of everything that I haven't done, kids books all the way up to adult fiction, and nonfiction books of every sort and angle. The thread behind it is that one thing, that thing that just you're always talking about, that thing that you say so often that if you've got teenagers, them, or if you have younger siblings, if you're young enough that your kids aren't teens yet, they roll your eyes when you say it because you're talking about it so much. My assumption, Tracy, would be that for you, it's, stuff to do with finances,
Yes.
and um, at,
Yes.
at Thanksgiving, you're sitting there and somebody says something about something that doesn't really have anything to do with finance. And you're like, oh yeah, did you know that there's this, and you go into this thing about financial literacy or something like that, right?
Were you
And the
listening in on my Thanksgiving dinner conversation? Because I legitimately did that. I went on this spiel about how with credit card usage, even if you pay it off at the end of every month, like how you still spend more anyway.
right, yeah, I mean, just
Excuse me.
and I'm sure, even though I wasn't there, I'm sure that around the table people were like, here goes Tracy again, she's talking about, there is a clue in that. Why is that so important to you? And who is the person that really does need to hear that thing? That's really kind of the I know that wasn't exactly the answer to the question you're looking for, but that's really the answer.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, Steve, how can people get connected to you?
Well, let me give you a free gift. How about that? All right. If you go to ongoingwealthguide.com, that's ongoingwealthguide.com. And this ties so well into your show. um, there's a free gift there. It's my 5-step formula for ongoing wealth in your life and business. Included in that guide is actually even the link to my signature Write Your Bestseller in 1 Hour workshop. And I've got people that have written dozens of books just off of that one workshop. But we're going to go through in those 5 things and talk to you. Now, I am going to give you a definition here, especially because you're a money coach person. For me, wealth, abundance, if you will, has nothing to do with dollars and cents in the bank. Because if that was true wealth, then every time you paid a bill, you'd be less wealthy, And if you were good and you were saving up a down payment for a house, which is an asset versus other things that aren't, um, but you take that large chunk of money out of your account and you put it in escrow and you use it to spend that as purchase the house. If that was the definition of wealth, then you would have gone from wealthy to poor in that one transaction.
Mhm.
And that's not really truly what wealth is.
Yeah.
And I talk about some of those kind of things, but to really experience that ongoing abundance in your life and how you can do that. And if you want it, I'll show it again. You can upgrade for my book for 99 cents. You can upgrade in there and get my book for 99 cents, the ebook version of it. And then whether you get just the free guide or you get the book on the thank you page, there's also a link that I'll give you a free 15-minute conversation to talk about anything in your marketing or your book or any of those kind of things I could do to help you out.
That's awesome. So
Ongoingwealthguide.com.
love it, love it. And I'll put that in the comment section as well so people have it there too.
Perfect.
So basically, just to recap our conversation, everybody, if they've got God's breath in their lungs, has a story to tell. And that story is important to help others in their situation and where they are. They don't even have to pick up a single pen to write a book. They could be the most, for lack of a better phrase, illiterate person on the face of the planet. As long as they could speak and tell you a story, you can
Mhm.
create a book from that. And from
Yes.
there, use your methods and your algorithms or Amazon's algorithms to help that become a bestseller.
Yes.
Awesome. And
Yeah. And let me just say, because of what you do in the world, um, we all have stories
mhm,
and those stories drive us. And when it comes specifically to money, the story that you're telling yourself is going to make the difference in where your money is. It's really easy to give into I'm broke, I'm poor, money's hard to get to, all the negative things that most of us grew up, we caught as children, because mom told us, no, we can't afford to do that. And so we thought that meant we were poor rather than that mom was practical and had a budget, you know. Um, the same is true on the other end, though, too. If you have a story about God will supply your needs exceedingly abundantly above, that's true too. It's a matter of what story are you telling yourself, and then what story do you share with the world?
Oh, that got me right here in my coach heart because you're absolutely right. And what I get to do, Steve, is come alongside people and help them with what we call those limiting beliefs. The oh, I can't do this because, or I'll never overcome this because. That's a limiting belief. You're limiting yourself and your abilities and your capabilities. And what we get to do is push back on that and shine a light on their potential and help them walk into that.
Mhm.
So, audience, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you want to have a conversation with Steve about sharing your story, or if you're ready to rewrite your story in your finances, please reach out to us. Use the links in the comment section and set up a complimentary conversation. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.